Folks. My name is Pablo de Jesus. I'm the Executive Director of Unitarian Universalists for Social Justice, and we're pleased to have you join us this evening. Thank you so much for showing your curiosity on the circumstance that DC residents face. I'm going to ask you to do some of our typical UU roll call check-in. Please put into the chat your name, your state, perhaps your congregation, or certainly your congregation, and perhaps a land acknowledgement or preferred pronouns. This is deeply appreciated because we want our guests to know who are in the room with them this evening. We want to have a sense of the crowd and where you come from, where you hail from. I'm also going to ask you to be sort of present in the moment in the session with us, and in particular, mind your microphones. If you are not speaking or don't expect to speak within the next 13 seconds, then you should go to your microphone icon and you should press mute. It usually looks like a stylized microphone. So, for example, our two guests this evening, Anna and Anne, both have their channels open. There we go. Thank you, Anne. And I also want to just appreciate you. You're giving us some of your attention this evening, this week. We know there are a lot of things going on in the world, not the least of which is the battle over the budget resolution and reconciliation that's gearing up, which USJ is actively engaged in. And, you know, every moment of these big legislative fights, there's a part of my brain that wonders, well, how different would it be if Washington, D.C. had two senators to weigh in and lobby their fellow members of Congress? And how different would it be if our delegate wasn't a delegate, but was in fact a member of Congress and could participate in these monumental, extremely important floor votes, the final bits of decision-making that are made on behalf of the American public and the residents that don't happen to be Americans. So part of what we're doing here this evening is trying to enrich your understanding of the issues with the context and the history, and then some of the state of play that activists on the ground are talking about and experiencing. And I want everybody to have, as part of their mental map for why this issue matters this evening, two things to keep in mind. President Trump is toying with the idea of abolishing home rule for DC. He's talking about it consistently in the press. So it's probably going to be a real thing for those of us who live here in DC. What that means, none of us knows, but we know it's an active part of the conversation around his broadest agenda. The other thing is that part of that agenda included freezing funds and laying off lots of federal employees, and many of the people who, like individuals in my household networks, work for NGOs that were receiving federal funds to do work. And those folks are being laid off or furloughed, and none of them have a senator and a fully empowered delegate to act on their behalf, despite the fact that Congress is negotiating perhaps one of the largest pieces of legislation in recent history. So with that, I want to remind you to close off your mics unless you're actively speaking or expecting to speak. I want to remind you to please put into the chat your name, your state, your congregation, your personal pronouns, a land acknowledgement. And I want you to settle into your curiosity this evening. Open your mind. Show some generosity of spirit with regard to what the speakers are going to cover and what the film is trying to talk about. I see that we're gathering a nice sized crowd, so I'll just give it another moment or two. And then I'm going to invite the film producer to speak to us and set up the film. I guess I want to do something that is a little different than normal. And I'll invite people to put, if you have something that's on your heart, that has been resting on your heart in a heavy way these past 4 weeks of the new administration, I invite you to name that in the chat. Let's do a waterfall in the chat of the things that we're carrying around with us that are really on our minds and in our hearts.
No sound.
Can't hear you.
That's all
You
right.
must, okay.
I'm sorry. That's fine. I was attending to my household needs. I have a 9-year-old scampering in the background. So please don't hold that against me. I needed to give a parental instruction. So I do want to take this moment and just say something that I've been saying sort of consistently in the events that we hold, which is that we're going to have an interesting session for you this evening. We have about 120 minutes of programming for you. We're doing some housekeeping right now. Then I'm going to do a little bit of grounding. We're going to have the producer set up the film. Then we're going to do a 1-hour screening. And if you're hearing yourself speak, then please mic yourself. We're going to do a little bit of Q&A after that with the producer. And then we're going to segue into the time focused on the current state of play. And we'll have a hard close, not the soft close that we often do at UUSJ, the hard close. So the end will in fact be the end. There will be no water cooler time. Now, all of us have been reflecting on the circumstance of our nation, and as Executive Director of Unitarian Universalists for Social Justice, I've been really thinking through and doing deep discernment and a hefty amount of sacred dreaming on what is UUSJ's role in this moment. And you're probably familiar with the framing that the UUA is using of meeting the moment. And I really sat with that question after the election and leading into the new year. And I just want everybody who's joining our sessions or attached to our small but mighty organization to know that it is a truism. For nearly 25 years at UUSJ, we've actually been building our strength for this fight, even though we didn't know it was coming during our lifetimes. And it is true. It's not hyperbole to say that our faith movement has a long tradition of grappling with injustice and pejorative politics and indifference in the public square. And it's also the case that the two separate histories of our Unitarian and Universalist ancestors have a history that goes even further back. They were abolitionists. They were anti-segregationists. They fought against Jim Crow in the South. They were doing good works, resisting the forms of oppression in their generational lifetimes. And that leads me to the conclusion that we as Unitarian Universalists, we have to breathe deeply and really take into our minds and spirits that we can survive. We can rebuild. We can eventually thrive. This is not insurmountable. It will be unpleasant, but it is not insurmountable. And we have power. We can lift our voices to offer faithful defiance. And I assert to you that this evening, part of that faithful defiance work is to learn more about DC statehood. So with that, I'm going to introduce our producer, Anna Reed Gerard, excuse me, is the founder of Marigold Productions, LLC, and is an award-winning writer-producer of documentaries for primetime national television, museums, educational markets, IMAX screenings, and international media markets. Anna's specialty is sort of turning history into understand, or turning to history to understand the dilemmas facing our society today. So she's a producer with experience, deep experience. She was a lead writer, producer on numerous PBS documentaries. Among them are The Impressionist on the Sign and Kate Chopin, A Reawakening, and Power to Heal. She was development producer on the international IMAX film Flight of the Butterflies, and assistant director and writer on Looking East, William Howard Taft's 1905 Mission to Asia. The photographs of Harry Fowler Woods, a photographic exhibition appearing in both the United States and China. And the programs that Anna has worked on have won major awards, among them an Academy Award nomination, local Emmys, the Sign or Scene, Golden Eagle, Jade Award for Excellence in Writing, Best Environmental Film, DuPont Columbia Award, Film Festival Awards, and others. So the main thing to know here is that Anna has chops and knowledge, and that The Last Battlefront is her first film as a director. And with that, I remove myself from the highlight and I give you Anna.
Thank you, Pablo. Am I okay? And thank you everyone who's come. And I want to thank Pablo and the Read Voting Rights Project and the League the League of Women Voters of DC and others who've been have worked so hard in for the District of Columbia, and with whom I've been working on this effort. So my name is Anna Gerard. I was a resident of the District of Columbia for 32 years, and I was always mystified by the fact that we didn't have any representation in Congress. And the idea for this film came about through my children who attended DC's public schools, and a good friend of my youngest son went on a hunger strike for the DC, and his name was Sam Jeweler, and I pleaded with him to end his hunger strike because I was worried about his health, and so he agreed to do it, and we started to research the film, and the research for this film lasted for over 10 years, but the work behind this. This really became a team effort of a lot of people. A lot of Washingtonians got involved in this, of all backgrounds, of all ethnic and racial backgrounds. And I just want to pay special homage to Maha Haddad, the editor and co-director, and Ziad Foti, who was the co-producer, and Damien Cour, the cinematographer, and others they were instrumental in the making of this film. And there were countless others. There was something special about the making of this film, of Washingtonians coming together to tell their story about what happened. And what made this film unique was that it was there were Washingtonians telling their story and their perspective about what it means to not have a vote and not to have a representation in the national legislature. DC is the only capital of a major democracy in the entire world where the folks who live in, the residents who live inside don't have representation in the national legislature, the only one. And when you look at so when I was looking at trying to understand how this could have happened, it really, no one had ever made a film of the history of this. And I wanted to see how this could have happened. So we went and we looked at these 4 turning points in the history of DC. And it was fascinating because what became clear was race and politics played the key roles in all 4 turning points. And so that we could see that these became the stumbling blocks all the way through, and that my hope was in making this film that we could reach out beyond the envelope of DC itself to the states outside and to Americans outside of DC, to educate them about the situation facing Washingtonians, so that we could get support for to change the situation, because Washingtonians have been fighting about this since 1800. They've been fighting to try to change the situation for a very long time. It's been a very, very difficult situation to overcome. But my hope is if we can reach out beyond to other states, that we can begin to get support outside. And this was true, in fact, in the 20th century, when one of the Fauntleroy, one of the leaders of DC, got a team together and went and challenged a man named Macmillan, who was from South Carolina, who had really been a stumbling block for DC, and he challenged him in South Carolina, and he was voted out of office. And it was the next year that DC finally got home rule. And now we're facing that again, that Mike Lee of Utah is challenging home rule again for the District of Columbia. So my prayer is that we can reach Americans elsewhere in the country and let them understand that the people who live and work and have children in the District of Columbia need to have the same rights that Americans have in all the states. And we need to have statehood. It's the only way to gain that, to gain the same rights that Americans have elsewhere, because we don't. DC is an enclave, a federal enclave, and we do not have the same rights as Americans elsewhere. I think people don't really understand that. So I'm hoping that in watching this film that they'll begin to have some sense of the history behind this and can reach out to Washingtonians and begin to support this. And I'm hoping also in the process of working on this story that we can also get Hispanic voices, because this film was made during the pandemic, and we had to cut short our interviews. We do not have Hispanic voices in this because it was not an oversight. It was that the pandemic hit just as we were in the middle of shooting our film. So I'm hoping to go back in and capture those voices and to interview those individuals, but to capture other voices in the future. So I'm hoping that you will that can watch this film and gain insights of what this means, because this is a symbolic landscape. This is the capital of America, and we need to make sure that the 702,000 people who live in the nation's capital have the same rights as Americans in all of the states. So I hope you enjoy the film.
Thank you so much, Anne. That's a great setup for the film. So now we're going to pause recording. And then I'm going to suggest to everybody that you look at that record.
All right.
So, Anna, my first question is, you suggested, and folks should feel free to put questions in the chat, but also we're recording, so I will privilege those people who are brave enough to raise their electronic hand and ask a question of the producer, director. themselves. Okay. But Anna, my question for you is, sort of two things. First, could you tell us a little bit more, because you suggested in your open comments, about how researching and pulling the film together changed your sense of the history of DC and the way in which politics and race run together throughout its entire existence?
Um, thanks, Pablo. Well, I saw in looking at this, I wasn't sure what was behind the fact that this peculiar situation where folks living inside didn't have representation in Congress. And when I interviewed quite a number of historians, and one of them said he steered me to look at the Organic Act of 1801, where he was saying that the Federalists had um, gotten they freaked out when they lost the election of 1800, and they were desperately trying to find a way to salvage their situation, and that I should look into that. And so it looks as though a lot of the problems stemmed in that early period where where the founders were scrambling to pull together this fledgling nation, and they weren't quite confident. They weren't confident about what they were doing at times, and also at that time, the nation was, especially the capital, there weren't very many folks living inside this enclave, this federal enclave, and so they didn't feel the pressure to solve that problem for those living inside the District of Columbia. But Hamilton, Alexander Hamilton, he knew they were making a mistake, but they just didn't solve it at the time. And then as time went on, race and politics always got in the way. It was that tangle, and now those are the two issues that keep throughout in the four turning points that I looked at. Those are the two issues that just kept getting in the way of solving the problem. And now the problem is still there. And McConnell doesn't want to let DC to come in as a state because he doesn't want two Democratic senators to get into the Senate. So we're still into that problem, but I'm going to let Ann Anderson handle that because she's better at that. But in terms of me talking about this, I'd like to talk about it from the point of view of stories and the history, and also to allow Washingtonians to talk about it from their own perspective, because they're the ones that we were trying to capture the stories of Washingtonians throughout this whole long history. And we only have caught some of them. There were many others that we didn't even get to put into this. There were many others, stories that were quite fascinating. That if I'm able to raise monies, I'd like to go back and pull those stories up. And I'm hoping if we can raise monies, we can also do additional filming and to get Hispanic voices into this story, because that was what we weren't able to do because we were filming during the pandemic. So,
I see several questions. I'll just say this. We're going to follow up with an email that'll give you a link that'll allow you to solicit the movie and for you to bring it to your congregation. That's exactly what we want you to do after sitting through tonight's screening and then presentation. I guess what I would say, Anna, the one thing that struck me is if you are able to pull together the funds, I think having similar interviews with the youth of DC about the issues might be another interesting angle, because
I've already begun some of this. I've already begun speaking with a number of folks for that. And in terms of, so I've already begun that effort. If I can raise those funds, I mean, I have the team that could do it. So I'm hoping we can do that. But I think this is important to do now because, especially with Trump and Republicans in the position they're in, because DC is especially in a very perilous position right now, and I think it's I'm hoping that others can come to the aid of the District of Columbia and to the residents of DC, especially now.
I want to recognize that Ann Hoffman tonight is full of Anns. Anna, Annie, you know,
Yeah,
Uh,
the whole statehood movement is full of ands.
there you go.
Yeah, right.
So,
Yeah.
please
Uh,
ask your question.
I wondered, you mentioned before and just now, the 4 turning points. And
Right.
I don't think I could identify them.
Okay. You want me to give them now? I'm
Yes,
glad to.
please.
Sure. Well, I looked at the founding of the country, 1783 to 1801. That was the first one. And the second one was the Civil War period of 1862 to 1874. The third one was a century later, around the 1950s to around 1990. And then the fourth one was the modern day, around 1998 to today. But please note that the part when we were making the film, we had quite a number of interviews scheduled for that fourth period. And that's when the pandemic hit, March and April of 2020. So that's the part that is weaker. We weren't able to get those interviews. We just didn't know, we didn't understand. We made the right decision. We had to, we didn't know whether it was safe or not. We had about 20 people on the production team. So it was, we just didn't know whether it was safe to film interviews at that time. So
Well, you got in the House vote on statehood, so
yeah,
that was kind of the high point of the recent.
right. But also what I also paid out of my own pocket, for quite a bit, quite a few $1,000s for things for some for news footage, for the mayor, for Eleanor Holmes Norton, and some of the other footage that we had, because we weren't able to do the interviews that we were planning to do. So but we had to work with the footage we had in the can, and because we had to do, we were funded by Humanities DC and the Taft Foundation and private contributors, but we had to finish it within a certain time frame, which we did. But I guess I'm hoping against hope that we can go back and have maybe a part 2 to this. I mean, to expand this, because it's quite a rich history. It's the District of Columbia is it's more than I'd like to just bring out the lives and voices of Washingtonians.
And I think you did a great job doing that. And I guess I'll just ask a general question that's appearing in the chat. Yes, we're going to send folks the link so that they can request a screening at their congregation. But how do we help you get the documentary on PBS is the question that I'm seeing in the chat.
It's already on PBS.
Okay.
But it's already on PBS at the moment at WHUT at the Howard University's PBS station. But what I have to do is I have to raise at least 20,000 to get it to pay to WHUT because it was already accepted to go on PBS nationwide. So that by the National Educational NETA, by the National Educational Telecommunications Association. So they've already written me a letter accepting it, but I have to have a presenting station, and I have to pay to WHUT for that. So I'm raising funds for that.
Okay.
So
well, that answers the question that's in the chat.
okay.
I guess the answer is we can spread the word on the movie and help you do some fundraising.
We're trying to raise funds for that.
Okay. Well, at this point, I want to invite Ann Anderson to join our little panel here.
Okay.
For those who don't know Ann Anderson, She is a Unitarian Universalist and community leader with the Washington, D.C. League of Women Voters. And she's a clinical social worker, retired. She's also the mother of 3 wonderful children and grandmother of 3 astonishing grandchildren. Anne has advocated for DC statehood since around 1971. And in that work, she brings a deep conviction and agreement with the notions of universal voting rights and a commitment to our UU religious values. So with that, I give you Ann Anderson. And what do you want to add to this conversation? Because you've been witnessing and advocating and networking around these issues. I feel pleased to have crossed your path in the work that UUSJ was doing on DC statehood. But give us a sense of the state of play now. Maybe you want to break that into the state of play up until the new administration and how you see things unfolding for at least the next 4 odd years.
Sure. And thank you, Pablo. And thank you, Anna. I arrived in Washington, D.C. in 1964. It was the first year that we got to vote for president after 100 years. And it really seemed like, okay, we're going to get some real democracy really growing here in DC. And then we got some home rule, and then, it's like it's been that kind of growth and hope and lots of twists and turns. And just watching some of the things. I mean, I was here in the 68 riots. It's a lot of what I saw in your film I've lived. And so it's always real. I mean, this isn't the first time I've seen it, and it still grabs me. So thank you very much. So let me just say, in terms of DC statehood, that in 2021, in April, we got as close as we've ever come historically. We actually passed the bill, and you showed it. We passed the bill in the House of Representatives. So that's a landmark, because what we were saying to ourselves at that point was, okay, nobody can ever say again that we've never been able to pass the bill. So it's passed once, it's passed twice, and so we are, in some ways, never been closer. We are also maybe been a long time since we've never been further away at this point, because we're not going to be able to do anything in this current administration. And I'm really sad about that, because in fact, there have been both Republicans and Democrats who have actually supported statehood over time. And for the record, the National League of Women Voters has supported full rights for DC citizens since the 1930s. So, we have been through, all kinds of changes of leadership, and it's not partisan issue, which is one of those things that people keep saying, well, this is a Democratic power grab. No, it's actually a civil rights, human rights, social justice, racial justice issue. And that's what it's all about. So there are just 2 more things I want to say about this, Pablo. One is that a lot of times when people start talking about it, they say, well, you can't do it. You can't do it because the founding fathers said that you had to have, a special place for Congress that was, had its own place. And so Washington, D.C., you need a constitutional amendment. No, you don't. You know why? Because the bill, the Washington, D.C. Admission Act, actually just shrinks the footprint of the District of Columbia, the federal district. And the Constitution says it can't be any bigger than 10 miles square. So we say, okay, you already shrank it once right before the Civil War when you sent the Virginia part back to Virginia. So let's do it again. So the bill calls for about I would say somewhere around 2 miles square. That's all around the mall and, where the 8th graders come to see Washington, D.C. That's the place, that's our national capital. When they come, they don't come to visit my house, they don't see that. But me and 700 some thousand other people live in Washington, D.C. And we've got 4 different ballot access parties here, and we're all disenfranchised. So it's really important that we add ourselves as a state, because we'll still have the federal district. It'll still be under congressional total exclusive jurisdiction, and that frees up the rest of us to be able to become a state. So that's one piece, because that often is one of those things that they say, "What, you can't do it. You can't do it." The second thing I want to say is, we know from in DC, League of Women Voters, how many things are going on in this country right now and how much stress there is. And so what we've done is we have established a Substack for the DC League. And people can freely, it's all free. You can subscribe. And when you do that, you'll get one email weekly saying, okay, here's where we are. Here's where we are. Because there's things that are going on that are really fast. And we already have 6 bills that have been introduced in Congress that are interfering with our limited home rule, including the one that says, well, we're just going to get rid of DC home rule. We don't know what that's going to look like. So let me just say, if you want to subscribe, it's lwvdc.substack.com. So lwvdc.substack.com. And then the other thing is that we actually have a petition that you can sign. And why sign it now? Because we are trying to build, we're trying to grow this. We're trying to help people understand. We're trying to help people get educated about all of this. And if you sign the petition, it helps us build our impetus, our flow, and you can ask your friends to help get it signed. I think Pablo just put it in the chat, and that will help a lot, because then we can go and say, hey, we've already done this once. We went to senators and said, hey, you know what? This many people, and we gave them a whole little file. All these people, your constituents, are the ones who wrote to us and signed a petition and saying, we believe that DC should become a state. And it's the constituents that they're going to pay attention to, because you all who live in the 50 states are the people who have.
And I just want to underscore that. I put in the chat the petition that we as a collective of UUs working on this stuff have pulled together. There's also a link if you want to get involved with UUSJ and Anne and Anna and the Read Voting Rights Project. in trying to establish and engage the members of Congress who we will need to have good relationships with them once the political circumstance shifts a little bit. But that's all ground game. It's pre-work. You have to prepare to then receive the lightning when the lightning strikes, right? Like, so if you want to be involved with that, I encourage you to at least, let us know who you are with that link. I'm asking you to please, take a copy of our, what we call our petition poster, and bring it to your UU congregation, show it to folks after services at coffee hour, encourage them to use the QR code or the bit.ly, however they want to get to the technology and fill out the petition. Again, as Anne just explained, the more people we have, especially those who live someplace other than DC, who are saying, I agree that this is a matter of, legalized voter suppression or racial injustice and systemic disenfranchisement. The more folks we have saying those kinds of things with their voice, the easier it'll be to find the members across the other side of the aisle who agree that this is a circumstance that needs to be addressed in a prudent way. And as Anne has suggested in the past, there were plenty of people on both sides of the aisle who took these matters seriously. And I guess there's a question floating in the chat sort of about the DEI component of all this. I mean, I'll say this. I personally think that complex of race and class and political power, it's the thing that unites the story from beginning to end. And if you're thinking about the challenges to DEI programming and content and social infrastructure as anything other than an effort to reinstitute a Jim Crow culture in the United States,
Exactly.
I please reach out to me so we can correspond by email, because that is the history that's at play in the background. So that's what I at least want to add to our conversation. And again, I keep on seeing the question about, is there a possibility to show the film? Yes, the resounding answer is yes. You will get from us, from UUSJ, an email that says, and if you want to bring the film to your congregation, then click here so that Anne and Anna can know who you are and follow up with those details. And they might even be convinced to do their Anne and Anna roadshow for you. I see a couple. I see.
I want to add. I
No.
want to add that I have a roster of. I have a number of other speakers that from my production team and folks that I interviewed. It was a fully integrated team of there were blacks, immigrants, Palestinian Americans. I mean, so it was reflected all of Washington. The team that made this film, it was not just whites. It was a full team. It was fully racially integrated and ethnically integrated team that made this film. So it was, and they were what, and the for example, Damien, who is the cinematographer, the lead cinematographer, he's African American, and his family has lived in DC for generations. So that we were really reflecting a lot of different perspectives.
Now, I want to make sure to call Abby Nelson to the mic, because she's had her electronic hand up.
Okay.
But you walked into one of my questions, Anna.
Okay.
Did you have any Republicans who worked on the film with you?
Good point.
you're
No,
so-
actually, I do. I did. Actually, yes, I did. Yes, I always on my films, I always have conflicting points of view. If you could tell in this film, it is not. There was someone who was opposed to the idea of statehood in this film, which I don't agree with him, but I think it's important to hear conflicting points of view. So one of the persons in the film was a Republican in this film.
That's a pretty prominent personality here in DC, I'll say.
Mm, right, no,
Uh,
but there was there were Republicans in this film,
okay, good.
okay?
I mean, Abby, take the mic from me. I'll just say again, I'll keep on adding. I know plenty of Republicans. I have them in my family. You know, I don't hold that against people per se. I do hold the current regime's agenda against the party that can't seem to make a course correction or respond to robust, egregious executive overreach. But you know, they will have to work on that. Abby, please ask your question.
Well, what I'm going to say is I did put in the chat and we will put in the letter, the follow-up email, the Substack link so people can be updated. The other thing, is there was a question about how to donate money to Anna's production company in order to meet her goal to get this documentary fully on PBS nationally.
But
And
also, it also
was
is,
that answered? Did,
I did it with one person, but if you like, I can put it in, I answered it to one person who asked, but it's to go to, it can be, it's, my fiscal agent is Women in Film and Video. And you just have to approach them and say you'd like to donate to this film. But I can put that in,
well, why don't you
let's
send
do
add it,
that
that to me?
later. I'll
let's
do
Send
it.
it
add
to
it to the
me.
letter.
Yeah,
Let's add it
send
to
it
the
to
letter,
me and we'll
Pablo.
add it to the letter that's
right.
going out
Yeah,
after.
And
That was a great question. And I wondered if Anne could just quickly answer. Once you mentioned that twice the bill was passed through the House. And someone asked, when was the second time? And the third question was, and then what happened when it got to the Senate?
Ah, okay. Yes, in 2021, that was the second time it had been passed in the House. And then it got stalled out in the Senate. I can tell you right now, we have now once again, because you know, at the beginning of every congressional session, you have to reintroduce bills. So the HR 51 and S 51 have been reintroduced. And there are 178 co-sponsors for the House bill. And there are 41 co-sponsors for the Senate bill. So we still have a good solid group. Unfortunately, of course, it's not bipartisan at this point. But as I've mentioned before, it has been the first statehood bill that was introduced by a Republican and a Democrat together. So
Anne, let's put a fine point on it. If the second time that it passed the House was in 2021, when was the first time?
it was in 2019.
2019 or 2020. I think it was
Well, it could have been 2020. It was the end, it
2020.
was in the previous, it was in the previous session, previous
Right,
congressional.
right. Because I was filming at that time. It was-
Okay, there you
yeah,
go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
But just to be clear, it keeps getting stalled in the Senate. And, you know, and so far, that's what we would imagine would continue to happen until we get enough people who understand that this is not okay and that it would be really important for everybody in this country pays taxes to be able to vote in
Okay.
our
Exactly.
national legislature.
But
exactly.
do you have a sense of why it stalls in the Senate, right? Because in the last session of Congress, it was, you know, the Democrats were in control of the Senate. So what is if it passed on razor thin margins in the House, what is occurring in the Senate that it wasn't automatically taken up and run with to bring it home?
Well, we had 46 co-sponsors in the Senate in the last Congress, and there are people who are anxious about this, and there are people who are not necessarily ready to do it, and we're continuing to explore why that is. It's not clear to me. My bet is that it has something to do with senators maintaining their stand vis-a-vis their base. So there's only so much that, in fact, legislators can do, given what they have to pay attention to, what their constituents want, which is why my point is, can we go out and educate the constituents? Because I'm fond of saying, we are Washington, D.C., surrounded on the north, south, east, and west by the United States of America. And the United States of America are the people who can make us whole.
And do you feel, I always had the sense that it was the simplest thing of that McConnell is blocked it, especially because they do not want 2 additional Democratic Democratic senators, which is what DC would bring in. Is it simple as simple as that? That
Oh,
you're going to
yeah.
add 2 more. It's just
If you
that.
want to talk
That's-
about the opponents rather than trying to get enough people, who are actually proponents, the opponents are saying that it's a Democratic power grab.
It's just
And let me finish.
Yeah.
The critical piece here is, it's really un-American to disenfranchise somebody because of how they might vote, first of all. Second of all, there are the last 2 states that we brought in, Hawaii and Alaska, were brought in to pair up, so there would be one Republican and one Democrat. Well, guess what? Those states have switched. So we have actually no idea how the people of Washington, D.C. would actually vote. Surely, to begin with, there would be Democrats. I mean, how could you not? But over time, just like Hawaii and Alaska switched, we have no idea how people might vote. So I just do not buy that we are in any way, shape, or form guaranteeing. I mean, are you going to tell me that every party is not going to fight for Washington, D.C.'s vote? Of course they are. So, enough said.
Now, before we go to Ann Hoffman's question, I want to ask, because I don't know the answer, and I'm hoping you do, Ann Anderson. Where does the DC GOP party stand on all this?
The DC GOP party at a while back had actually said that they were in favor of statehood. But since then, they have switched back and said, no, we can't do this.
Well, that's the answer to the question, Chow co-chair. And Steve and Rod. Those are the people in the chat. Ann Hoffman, you have a question?
No, I was just going to answer the question of where the Republicans were. I used to lobby with or advocate with 2 leaders of the DC Republican Party, and they were wonderful. But once Trump was elected the first time, they backed off, and they've stayed backed off.
We can pray that there'll be a new day eventually. I certainly believe there will be. I'm
Let
looking,
me flag the fact that one should look at, I should pull these up for the future. Nixon, Eisenhower, any number of Republican presidents have supported the District of Columbia's desire to be a state, and desire to deal with this problem. Nixon is one of them. So this is not just a Democratic issue.
yeah.
So
Yeah, again, Walter Fauntleroy, I think it was, who said the problem with DC becoming a state is the 4 twos. We're too
exactly,
democratic, we're too black, and we're too urban.
right.
So, I mean, to that
Actually, it
point,
was
the
Teddy
demo-
Kennedy.
Teddy quoted
That
it.
was Teddy Kennedy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he was quoting Fauntleroy.
okay.
Oh, it could
But-
be.
But to that point, the demographics of DC are changing steadily. So does that suggest that in 10 years or 15 years, when DC is no longer a chocolate city, the disposition will change? Is that part of the theory of the case here? If the racial attitudes are
not.
driving it?
I hope not. I think
Well-
we would have joined the Union as a chocolate city. But
I think it's really difficult to know, you know. You can see by my skin that that's not going to be the way I'm going to vote. But it's like, who can tell? That's my point. If we're going to disenfranchise people or enfranchise people because of how they might vote, that's really not a good way to run a democracy.
Mm.
I'm seeing the question and I'm forgetting the answer myself, but what are the 2 states that are smaller population than DC? I think one of them.
Wyoming
I'll
and
take it.
Vermont.
Wyoming and Vermont.
Yeah,
And we're very close to North Dakota. We're also very close to Alaska. And there are some 6 states that are under 1 million or close to 1 million. And so, there's just a lot of folks out there who have 2 senators and a voting congressman who, are right in our territory, and we don't have anybody. So
I want to, in the future also, I want to bring up, I read this book, it was a while back when I was first looking into this. There were 6, Washington DC is one of 6 federal enclaves in the world. I think Rio may be one and Mexico City another. And they solved the problem, but we did not. So I've got to go back and go find that book and reread it. But we have
yeah,
we have
there are a
not.
lot of different ways to do that, and they have all done it, and we're still sitting here. I couldn't agree with you more. I
Yeah,
see another
yeah.
hand up.
yeah.
Shawnee, please come off mute and ask your question.
Okay, it's a little nerve-wracking, but hello, everyone. I'm listening to this and I am just recognizing, so this is a very personal, close issue to my heart. I lived in DC for a long time. I'm now in Virginia, but still rent in DC, my home there. And obviously we are in a bigger picture right now and I was the one putting things about DEI in the chat. So sorry about that. But, we are really, really going backwards right now.
Exactly.
The executive level, right? So there is, in my mind, there is absolutely no way that this is going to pass right now. However, DC has 2 of the most brilliant orators. Bowser and Eleanor Holmes Norton right? Like they are just brilliant. And they are such good speakers and they are so motivating and they are just, they touch hearts when they speak. And I say that about Bowser because she touches my heart because she's brilliant. Norton Wright is just warms my heart and touches it that way. And I can't help but think about DC statehood as an organizing tool in a broader picture of like the executive branch pulling us back to Jim Crow, which is where I feel like we are going. I mean, this whole,
Exactly.
we have 6 states that are banning books
Yeah.
across, right? Like things are going completely bananas right now. So DEI is a bad word. I mean, this is just nuts. So I'm just wondering, like, from your guys' experience, where are we with Bowser and Norton, on this issue? Sorry, Holmes Norton.
Well,
So
I
if I
completely agree
can,
with you. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah,
Go ahead, Anne.
let me just say, that we owe a huge amount of respect and thanks to Eleanor Holmes Norton. And we also need to acknowledge that she's getting on. And there are just so many things that we can ask her to do right now. So, it's with sadness that I say that because, oh my God, she has really just put her life out there for us. And I have such gratitude for her. What I do think is that DC has been used as a petri dish in so many ways and so often over time. Say, well, we can do it to DC because there's no, we can do it because they can't do anything about it. That I do think you have a real point there for us to pay attention and really focus on supporting home rule because we're still protecting home rule right now, and then also moving us towards statehood right now as a way of saying, and by the way, this is also the way the rest of the country needs to be taking itself to. And so that's what I'm thinking, and if our mayor can do her magic, then great. But she is also trying to protect ourselves and has to be strategic. And so, it's complicated out there.
Yeah,
So.
Shawnee, I'd answer the question slightly differently. I'd say because of who's in the White House, the timeline on this is a minimum of 4 years, right? Okay, Grant, let's just concede that. But then the advocacy question becomes, what are we doing between now and that next election to get ready for the very next month, so that among the first priority bills that are introduced in Congress in the session of 2029, this is one of the hallmark bills that a majority of the folks who are going to be in that new session of Congress are willing to support. And that is a question that we can work on slowly over the course of the next 4 years. I don't think it's a flash in the pan issue for us right now, right? Like, or I don't mean flash in, I don't think it's a fire issue right now, right? The federal layoffs are more present in our minds. The assault on immigration is more present in our minds. The cuts to SNAP and CHIP and Medicaid that are being used to do a wealth transfer between normal Americans and wealthy and billionaire Americans, that's on our minds right now. But if we constantly put this issue on the back burner, we will never develop the relationships, develop the advocacy acumen necessary to speak to the issues as we get closer and closer to that 2028, 2029 opportunity. So that it's a long-winded way of saying, yes, there are things in the short term that are more important. But this is strategically an important, it's a valuable time to engage in the ways that we can. So does that answer the question, Shawnee, for you? Because that's the way my brain approaches your question.
I just want to flag two things quickly. There's a very important note from Miriam Edelman in which she's saying that Lisa Murkowski might be sympathetic to the District of Columbia. So please read that note because she comes from Alaska, a former territory that was granted statehood in 1959. So there's could be one sympathetic voice right there. And the second thing I want to flag is, and it's too big to go into right now, but this is an area that I'm researching now, is that I think DC is under a situation that will become increasingly perilous under Trump and the current Congress. And which is why I want to document it. And if I'm able to raise funds to document it in film, what happens, because I think that I have the sense that they want to militarize the District of Columbia. And then what Ann sent of the 6-pager that you sent earlier, even before the election, of the riders that were on the appropriations bills from the Congress, where they were talking about, for example, guns, where the various congressmen or women, they wanted to be able to force the district to allow people to bring in guns, someone who has a permit from another state to bring in their guns into the district, and any size magazine to bring them into the district. So that it seems to me we've got extreme voices. I mean, there's extreme situations that could be forced on the district in coming years.
Yeah,
So.
and let me just quote myself. When I was talking to the DC League about all of this, I said, look, I'm a birder. And so when I go watch birds, I see a lot of sitting ducks. And we are sitting ducks right now because we don't have a way of protecting ourselves because Congress has exclusive jurisdiction. But you know what happens when sitting ducks are disturbed? They squawk. They squawk and they fly up and they throw all kinds of things around and they really mess things up so that you can't really tell what's going on. So we're going to be squawking, and this is why I'm here, because I need you all to be squawking with us, because you're the ones who have the power to talk to people who actually have a vote and in Congress who can say, you know what, I don't think this is a good idea to really, try to militarize DC. And all of these things are actually, that's the kind of things that they can do to us. They can interfere with our home rule by doing all of these things. And if you go to our Substack, you'll see the list, because we're just keeping a list right there so you could all catch up. Every week we'll give you an update.
With that, Shawnee, you were about to say something. No? Okay.
No, well, just thank you guys so much. I mean, this is fantastic. I just have so many thoughts running through my mind because this is just such a precarious time in history that we're in right now. And I feel like there's a way to use this, and like you were saying, towards organizing, educating, right? And being able to
Absolutely.
show DEI in a different way so that it's not so like the way it's been taken over, it just has become meaningless, right? This is
In
a
the same way that we need to reestablish the fact that the American flag belongs to all Americans,
Yeah.
So it's like, those are the kinds of things, Shawnee, you will be receiving my email when you get the follow-up letter, and feel free to send me a follow-up.
So with that, I don't see anybody else with their electronic hand up. I don't see anybody else acting as if they have a burning last question. We are over time, but I didn't want to interrupt the last question interaction there. So please, thank you for joining us this evening. Let's all give a wiggly finger applause to our two guests. And
Thank you, everyone. And don't forget, this is the anniversary of our country coming up, right? This is 20, next year. So, we're celebrating the anniversary of our country. We should try to see if we can actually fix this problem that got messed up at the beginning. 250th anniversary of our country.
thanks again, everyone. I wish you a good evening. I myself am gonna turn the spigot off. I gotta go tuck in a 9-year-old. It's past bedtime.
Thank you, Pablo.
Good night, Pablo.
Good night, everybody.